They told me to take down my gate, but they had no idea what that gate meant to me. I bought this land to get away from people. 7 acres of raw Colorado hillside, thick pines, granite boulders, the kind of place where the only sounds at dawn are a woodpecker tapping in the distance and the creak of your own porch chair. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't luck. It took me 20 years of working construction sites and hauling myself across engineering projects just to scrape together the money. When I finally held the deed, I promised myself I'd never let anyone take this piece away. I built that gate myself. Steel posts buried so deep in concrete they could outlast a wildfire. A keypad bolted to a column I welded in my garage. The whole thing weighing nearly 400 pounds, swinging on hinges I greased with my own hands. To anyone else, it was just a barrier. To me, it was a line. The line between me and the world I'd fought so hard to escape. So the morning I opened that letter, I felt my stomach turn cold. I remember it clearly. It was a Tuesday. The sun hadn't burned through the mountain haze yet. My old dog, Murphy, half blind and half deaf, was snoring at my feet. I had coffee in hand, steam curling into the cool air, when I noticed a clean white envelope tucked in the mailbox. HOA letterhead, red and gray. I nearly tossed it. I wasn't part of any HOA. That was the entire point of this property. No neighbors, no rules, no committees. But curiosity got me. The words looked polite at first. Dear Mr. Brady, due to recent access concerns and emergency planning developments. Then came the part that made my jaw lock. You are hereby requested to remove or unlock the gate on your driveway and allow temporary access to members of the Red Mesa Bluffs Homeowners Association via your private road. Failure to comply within 14 days may result in legal action seeking enforcement of an emergency easement for community benefit. I read that last sentence 3 times. Community benefit. Temporary access. They made it sound harmless, neighborly, like I'd be doing some favor for the greater good. But what they were really saying was simple. Open your land or we'll take it from you. My road doesn't even connect to their neighborhood. Their closest property line sits a 1/4 mile south, across a granite ridge and a stand of pines thick enough to break your axe. Yet here they were, writing to me like I was already under their thumb. I didn't waste the day. By afternoon, I was in town, walking into the county recorder's office with a folder full of property surveys and title history. The clerk there, Lanny, she's worked that desk since the Clinton years, took one look at the letter and rolled her eyes. Red Mesa again? She muttered, pulling up the maps. She told me they tried the same stunt on a rancher last year. Sent letters, hinted at lawsuits, all because they wanted cheaper access for landscapers. That rancher had to threaten a harassment suit before they backed down. Her words stuck with me, not always just posturing. I drove home slower than usual that night. Dust kicking up behind the truck, sun sliding low over the ridge. I couldn't shake the thought, what if this wasn't just some bluff? What if they were setting something bigger in motion? Back at the house, I reread the letter, this time noticing a phrase I'd missed. In the spirit of community cooperation, we request your voluntary compliance. Voluntary, my ass. The next paragraph threatened permanent usage rights if precedent was established. That's lawyer talk, that. Give us an inch and we'll take the road. So I wrote my reply the next morning. Short, cold, to whom it may concern, this land is mine. The gate, the road, the soil under it, all mine. No access granted, temporary or otherwise. Any attempt to enter will be treated as trespassing. Signed, notarized, mailed, certified with a return receipt. But when I dropped that letter in the box, a thought hit me. What kind of neighborly association cuts their teeth on intimidation? Who looks at someone else's private land and says, we'll take it if we want it? I knew then this wasn't over. They didn't wait long to make their move. 3 nights after I mailed that letter, my gate went dark. It was 6 in the morning, frost still clinging to the gravel. I walked down the drive with my thermos in hand, Murphy padding along beside me. When I pressed the keypad, nothing. No beep, no click, just silence. For a second, I thought maybe the solar panel hadn't charged enough. It happens up here in the fall when the haze lingers. But when I opened the junction box, the truth hit me like a gut punch. The wires weren't frayed, not chewed by raccoons, not aged or weather-worn. They were cut. Clean. clipped with a pair of wire cutters and left dangling like someone was mocking me. I remember standing there in the cold, steam coming off my breath, just staring at the copper ends. That gate wasn't just metal and hinges, it was my line, and someone had crossed it. That day after work, I didn't waste time. I picked up motion-triggered cameras, 4 of them, mounted 2 on trees near the gate, 2 further up the drive where headlights would catch. Solar floodlights on either side of the keypad, wiring replaced with steel conduit buried under gravel so no one could snip it again. I even set a trail cam deep in the woods, facing the slope where someone might try sneaking around. And then I waited. 2 days later, I pulled up after work and knew something was wrong before I even killed the engine. The gate was closed, but the lock sat crooked. I stepped out, boots crunching gravel, and saw fresh scratches along the casing. A dent near the bolt. Someone had tried to pry it. They'd almost succeeded. My pulse hammered in my ears. I scanned the ground, and that's when I saw them, tire tracks. Deep ruts, still damp with mud, wide enough for a pickup. The tracks cut straight across my gravel, veered left into the woods, and disappeared downslope. Murphy whined beside me. He felt it too. I followed on foot, heart thudding, every step sinking into soft earth. The tracks wound down toward the lake, the one I'd bought 3 years back to extend my property line. I double-checked that paperwork when I closed. No easements, no shared access. Mine. And then I saw it. Right there in the dirt, like a punchline to a bad joke, stood a brand new wooden sign. Fresh paint, laminated top, bolted into the ground with 2x4s. It read, Scenic Trail, Red Mesa HOA Temporary Access Route. The audacity of it made my jaw lock. They hadn't just trespassed. They hadn't just cut wires. They'd planted a sign on my land, stamped with their logo like it was a public park. I stood there, fists clenched, breathing through my nose like a bull ready to charge. Then I pulled out my phone, snapped photos of everything, the gate, the tracks, the sign, and I called the sheriff. It took over an hour for the deputy to show up. Young guy, probably still breaking in his uniform. He listened, nodded, took notes, but I could tell he didn't really grasp what was happening. So, just to clarify, he said, pen hovering over his pad, you're saying someone from the HOA entered your land without permission? No, I corrected, voice sharp. I'm saying they broke in, they cut my wires, they pried my lock. They drove trucks across my property and staked a damn sign like they owned it. He shifted uncomfortably, muttered something about it sounding like a civil issue. Civil issue. That's what they call it when someone chips your fence, not when they carve a road through your land. By the time he left, I knew his report would vanish into a drawer, and I knew I couldn't rely on anyone else to defend what was mine. That night, I spread every document I owned across my workbench, surveys, deeds, easement histories. And then I called Joe Sandoval, a friend and a real estate attorney who didn't scare easy. I sent him copies of everything, every photo, every detail. He told me one thing, document everything, every intrusion, every scratch, every tire mark. Build the case. And so I did. By the end of the week, I had a drone flying loops over my ridge, cameras logging movement day and night. One trail cam even caught a blurry red Chevy sneaking through the woods at dawn. No plate, but I knew what I was looking at. They thought they could creep in like coyotes testing the fence line, but if they wanted a fight, they just picked the wrong man. They thought I'd roll over. Instead, I found out just how far they were willing to lie. Joe called me 3 days after I sent him the drone footage. His voice was calm, but there was tension under every word. Cameron, he said, you need to see this. The HOA had submitted a document to the county planning office. On paper, it looked official, an amendment labeled Emergency Access Corridor Designation Request. According to them, my driveway wasn't really mine. No, they claimed it was part of a historic trail, one that supposedly connected the eastern ridge to the main road back in the 1950s. I nearly laughed when Joe told me. That road didn't even exist until the late 80s. I'd seen the bulldozer scars myself when the old owner cleared it. But it wasn't just the timing that was wrong, it was the signature. They claimed the easement was granted by a man named Charles H. Langley. And that name stopped me cold, because I knew him. Langley was the man who sold me this land, Old guy, suspenders, oxygen tank, always smelling faintly of pipe tobacco. He died 5 years ago. Yet here was his name, neatly signed at the bottom of a notarized easement request dated just last fall. Dead men don't sign papers. I felt my blood run hot. I remembered shaking Langley's hand when I bought the property. He was clear, almost proud, when he told me, "This land is yours, son. No easements. No ties. Yours." He wouldn't have given the HOA an inch, and now they were using his name as if they'd dug him up to make him cooperate. Joe dug deeper. The notary stamp on the document, supposedly signed off by a woman who had retired in 2011. The stamp was dated nearly a decade after she'd closed her office. Forgery, pure and simple. That night I sat at my workbench, papers spread out like a war map, my hands shaking not with fear but with fury. This wasn't some bored landscaper sneaking over a ridge. This was organized, calculated. They'd fabricated history itself to get at my road. And I couldn't shake the image of Langley, sitting in his porch chair with his oxygen tank, telling me to take care of the land. If this was their idea of community benefit, it was built on the bones of a dead man's name. The next morning I filed for an injunction, walked straight into the courthouse with a folder thick enough to choke a copier and laid it on the clerk's desk. The judge didn't even hesitate. Temporary restraining order granted. HOA barred from setting foot on my property. For a moment I let myself breathe. I thought maybe that would end it. Court order in hand, cameras rolling, every angle covered. Surely they'd back off now. But peace didn't last, because as I pored over those documents, something else caught my eye. A string of tiny land transfers, half-acre parcels, slivers of woodland, surrounding my property on the southern and eastern sides, all sold in the past 6 months, all to the same name, Sunline Property Group. Never heard of them, neither had Joe, until we checked the registration. Sunline's mailing address was a P.O. box in Sedona, Arizona. The very same P.O. box used by Karen Owens, president of the Red Mesa Bluffs HOA. That snake wasn't just harassing me with letters, she was boxing me in. Piece by piece, she was buying the land around mine, tightening the noose. Her plan was obvious now, make it look like my 7 acres were just another part of their development zone. Then argue necessity, claim I was landlocking them. I sat there staring at the paperwork, the sound of the clock on the wall ticking too loud, Murphy shifting in his sleep at my feet. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a scheme, a slow, deliberate encirclement. And that's when something changed inside me. I wasn't just defending a gate anymore. I was defending every hour I'd worked, every drop of sweat I'd poured into owning this land. They wanted to make me a pawn, but I was about to become their wall. They came at midnight thinking they could be clever, and they nearly proved me right. I decided to stop waiting for them to make mistakes. I made one of my own, but it was the kind that baited a trap. I printed signs, professional-looking, laminated, a glossy project map stapled to a post, the kind of thing that looks bureaucratic and boring enough to fool someone who believes in paperwork over principle. Brady Ridge Expansion, the sign read. Phase 1, Gravel Road, Visitor Lodge, Cabins. Underneath, a sealed envelope labeled Phase 2 Access Plan, the sort of thing a snoop would want to peek into. I stuck the post up near the tree line that bordered one of the parcels Karen had bought through Sunline. I wired a pinhole camera into the post, solar trigger, backup battery, cloud upload. It was small. It was stupidly simple. And it was exactly the kind of thing someone desperate for confirmation would rifle through. I slept worse those nights than I had in months. Every twig snap sounded like a footstep. Murphy padded between the bedroom and the door, worried and wide-eyed. I told myself it wasn't paranoia, it was vigilance. Sometimes you have to act like your life depends on it to make ordinary people notice. Just after midnight on the third night, headlights crept up from the south trail. 2 figures stepped out of a red pickup, flashlights cutting thin cones through the dark. They moved like they'd done this before, quick, efficient, whispering in clipped tones. One of them reached into the envelope, leafed through the fake permit, and smiled like a man who'd found his answer. The other pulled out a phone and started taking photos. They walked right past the post camera. They stood staring at the map for almost 5 minutes, hatching plans they thought were safe in the dark. I watched the footage the next morning over my coffee and felt the strange, cold wash of satisfaction that comes from catching liars at their work. The wide-angle lens had them in frame the whole time. The red truck, the make of the boots, the way one of them kept rubbing his thumb over the HP logo on his jacket. They didn't know the camera existed. They didn't know the cloud upload had already sent the files to Joe. They didn't know I'd set a little bait that would lead directly back to them. Checkmate, I wrote to Joe in a one-line message. He replied with a single expletive and a plan. Don't confront. Document. Don't let them pin you as the instigator. We let them expose themselves. The next morning, the world woke under a slate-gray sky and a wind that pushed through the pines like a rumor. I was barefoot on the porch when I first heard it, a high, furious scream that isn't natural, the sound of metal under assault. I ran down the drive with a jacket thrown over my pajamas and nearly tripped on my own 2 feet. Only when I crested the ridge above the gate did I see the smoke and the sparks. 2 white trucks sat halfway up my gravel, the beds carrying generators and tools. Someone was using an angle grinder on my gate. The sound made my teeth buzz. They'd come in daylight this time. They'd brought badges of authority, reflective vests, magnets on the doors with the HOA logo, the kind of props people use to dress up a lie. Karen stood there like she was watching someone wind a clock, tan boots, a fleece vest with the HOA insignia, sunglasses even though the day was thin and gray, arms folded, smug and patient as a woman waiting for applause. I don't remember what I first yelled. I remember the freeze in their crews' faces when they saw me, the grinder operator stepping back like a dog caught chewing a shoe. I remember turning the camera on with shaking hands, stepping straight to the man with the grinder and filming the deep cuts he'd already made through the bar. Pieces of the keypad box dangled by wires. Tire treads chewed up the gravel. The generator's exhaust smell burned in the cold air. I spoke slow, letting each word land. This is private property. You are trespassing. There is a court injunction. Karen's smile never wavered. We had no choice, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Emergency development measure, county planning liaison cleared it. She said it like that would close the room. Like a liaison's whisper could turn felony into municipal chore. Maybe she thought I'd freeze. Maybe she believed the posture of power would make me back down. She didn't know I'd already flown the drone that morning, programmed for a flyover at the press of a button. It rose from my pocket, a small whir that felt like justice, and climbed into the sky. Through its lens, the whole tableau was clear. Trucks, workers, the grinder biting into the gate, Karen's face turned toward the horizon. The drone captured timestamps, GPS coordinates, and the kind of high-resolution evidence that makes denials look petty and small. I called the sheriff, then the county prosecutor. I called Joe. I didn't beg. I reported. I recorded. I watched as the men unloading gravel looked between their hands and the law like people deciding whether to run. The sheriff showed up later this time, a man who recognized the difference between a civil spat and criminal trespass. But that was after my gate had been gutted and my driveway had been trampled into messy ruts. Standing there, hands raw from the cold, I felt an odd clarity. They tried to make me a showpiece, a stubborn homeowner in a story about community compromise. They'd thought spectacle would cow me. Instead, their spectacle had built the record we needed. You learn something fierce in moments like that. Audacity can be a rope, and if you pull hard enough, it strangles the one who tied it. I went inside that night and watched the footage again. The men in the red truck at the signpost. Karen's voice on my yard. The angle grinder's scream. Every file buffered into a single ugly truth. They'd chosen to escalate, and in doing so, they'd left fingerprints everywhere. Sometimes the only way to stop a lie is to make it loud enough that the world has to see it. They wanted a road. What they got was a courtroom packed to the walls. I'd pictured a small hearing, a judge, a clerk, maybe a bored reporter if the day was slow. Instead, by the time my case was called, 30 people filled the gallery. Neighbors from Red Mesa, curious locals, a blogger with a notebook. One guy even brought popcorn like he was settling in for a show. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Joe beside me, calm as stone. Across the aisle, 3 attorneys in stiff suits flipped through binders, their faces smug like they already owned the verdict. Behind them sat Karen, flanked by board members. She didn't look at me once. She just typed into her phone, her smile fixed like the queen of a parade no one asked for. The judge, Haverson, an older woman with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense, skimmed the injunction file, then looked over her glasses. "Counselors," she said, "do you have any rebuttal to the claim of unauthorized entry and property damage?" The tallest attorney stood, clearing his throat. He tried to sound reasonable, citing emergency infrastructure guidelines and verbal assurances from some county liaison. No paperwork, no signed permits, just vague claims of necessity. Judge Haverson's face didn't move. "Are you seriously attempting to justify trespass and property destruction with a conversation?" The man stammered, the room shifted, and for the first time I felt the air tilt in my direction. Joe leaned over, whispered, "He's already bleeding." Then came the hammer. We rolled the drone footage. High-resolution video of white trucks parked on my gravel. A man with an angle grinder cutting through my steel gate. Karen, sunglasses on, giving instructions as if she owned the place. The crew unloading gravel, stakes in the ground, tape measures stretched across my property, time-stamped, GPS verified, clear as a church bell. The courtroom went silent except for the hum of the playback. And then one worker's voice broke through, captured by the mic on my drone. Karen said it was fine. I watched their attorney deflate, his pen falling flat against the pad in front of him. Joe wasn't finished. He submitted property documents, surveys, deeds, the restraining order served days earlier. Proof that the HOA had been notified and ignored it. And then came the bomb. Joe produced a report from our investigator, Sunline Property Group. The shell company buying up slivers of land around my property was tied directly to Karen's cousin in Arizona. Same cousin who'd received HOA funds for consulting. The same cousin who'd been quietly trying to buy my land last year with cash offers well above market. Karen's smirk cracked, just a hairline fracture, but I saw it. Joe drove the point home. He presented an email obtained legally, written by Karen herself. "We either get that access route secured this fall, or our eastern expansion is dead in the water. If Brady won't sell, we create the necessity." 2 months before the forged easement appeared. And then, with the room leaning forward, Joe laid the forgery bare. The notarized document signed by Charles Langley, the man who'd been dead 5 years when it was dated. The notary stamp from a woman who'd retired a decade earlier. And a handwriting analysis that tied the forged signature directly to an HOA board member who once worked for the county land office. The gallery erupted in whispers. Karen's face lost its color. Her attorneys shuffled papers like shuffling could erase ink. Judge Haverson leaned back, let out a long breath, and finally spoke. "This court finds the actions of the Red Mesa Bluffs HOA illegal. The easement filing constitutes fraud. The trespass and property damage constitutes civil and criminal liability." Her gavel cracked like thunder. Orders issued on the spot, all construction halted. HOA barred from setting foot on my land. Damages to be determined after a full audit. And the kicker, referral to the district attorney for criminal investigation. By the end of the week, the DA filed charges against Karen and 2 of her board members. Fraudulent filing, malicious trespass, misuse of HOA funds. The day the subpoenas hit, Karen was yanked out of a community meeting in front of her neighbors. The local paper splashed it across the front page. HOA president charged in gate scandal, plot to seize private road backfires. I bought 3 copies. I don't usually smile at headlines, but that one I kept folded in my workbench drawer. Because the truth was finally louder than their lies. You'd think after the courtroom hammer came down, they'd scatter like roaches under a floodlight. But no, some people don't retreat when cornered, they double down. The Red Mesa board tried spinning the story almost immediately. Within days, an email leak showed up on a neighborhood forum claiming I had provoked the conflict. According to them, I'd been uncooperative and escalated matters instead of seeking compromise. Apparently, refusing to let strangers bulldoze a gravel road through your property now qualified as aggression. I ignored the chatter. Gossip doesn't break steel, but I could feel the tide turning. The homeowners themselves, the ordinary families who'd been paying their dues all along, started asking questions. And what they found cracked the foundation wide open. The HOA's financial books were a disaster. Tens of thousands of dollars had been siphoned off into consulting fees with no clear work attached. Nearly 30 grand had gone to a company that didn't even exist 6 months prior. Guess who signed the invoice? Karen. A forensic accountant, hired by a group of furious homeowners, started pulling threads. And when you pull threads on a rotten sweater, it unravels fast. Landscaping bills that never matched the work. Community projects that existed only on paper. Payments to consultants with last names suspiciously similar to board members. Karen's cousin in Arizona showed up again, tied to multiple checks labeled zoning research. That cousin was the same man behind Sunline Property Group, the shell company gobbling up slivers of land around me. It didn't take long for resentment to boil over. The same people who once sat politely at HOA meetings, nodding as Karen smiled through her PowerPoints, were now demanding answers. Neighbors who'd once avoided my gaze in the grocery store were now whispering words like embezzlement and fraud. Half the board resigned within weeks. Some claimed ignorance. One even emailed me directly. I thought we were just negotiating access, not staging a land grab. Too little, too late. By the time the judge issued her ruling on damages, the HOA was a carcass. Karen faced a dozen felony counts. The board was fractured, and the homeowners, the ordinary people caught in her storm, were scrambling to pick up the pieces. The damages ruling hit like a sledgehammer, $410,000. Compensatory, punitive legal fees, repairs. Every penny the HOA had, and then some. When the number was read, I didn't smile. I just breathed. Because money doesn't fix sleepless nights or the sound of an angle grinder chewing through your gate in the dark. But it does balance the scales a little. The fallout spread faster than wildfire. The HOA collapsed under legal pressure, replaced by a voluntary neighborhood council with zero enforcement power. No more threats, no more fines, no more committee bullying. Just neighbors talking about landscaping and bake sales. Karen wasn't so lucky. Convicted on all counts, fraud, forgery, misappropriation of funds, criminal mischief. 12 years, no parole for 5. She cried in court, begged for leniency. The judge didn't blink. I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was finality, like a door had closed. The county even sent me a formal apology. Offered free land surveys, permanent markers driven into the soil at every boundary, declarations recorded in the books. No easement, no access, no loopholes. For once, the paperwork was on my side. It was strange, watching Red Mesa unravel. The same people who once waved HOA banners were now talking about lawsuits against Karen. One man even stopped by my property with a pie, said he was sorry for how long it had gone on. Another offered to help patch erosion on my lower trail. Awkward, honest, human. For the first time in months, I believed the storm was passing. The HOA wasn't just beaten, it was broken. And the people who'd stood behind it were finally seeing the truth. But truth has a way of leaving scars. And mine still stood in the shape of a ruined gate and a driveway torn to hell. The fight was ending, but the rebuilding, that was just beginning. The first thing I rebuilt wasn't my peace of mind. It was the gate. The old one lay in twisted pieces, scarred where the grinder's blade had chewed through steel. I could have welded it back, patched it, pretended it would hold. But pretending doesn't stop people who think they're entitled to your land. So I started over. I called a contractor I trusted, a man who'd built cattle enclosures in harsher country than this. We designed something that didn't just stand, it loomed. Plate steel reinforced across the frame, recessed keypad tucked behind a hood of metal, hinges sunk so deep in concrete that no blade would reach them. This time it wasn't just a barrier, it was a statement. We added cameras with overlapping fields of view, each one feeding to cloud storage. Floodlights with infrared sensors. A seismic monitor buried under the gravel that could pick up the vibration of a truck long before headlights touched the trees. And a voice intercom wired to record every word spoken at the entry. When it was finished, I stood there at dawn, coffee in hand, watching the light hit the steel. Murphy sat beside me in his brand-new doghouse facing the drive, ears pricked, tail thumping against the wood. I scratched his head and told him he had the best post in Colorado. He licked my hand and went back to watching the line. The county men came not long after, driving posts into the corners of my property, setting markers in concrete. They handed me paperwork stamped and signed, permanent declaration of no easement, no access, no loopholes, no gray area for anyone to twist. And as I walked the boundary with them, boots crunching in the pine needles, I realized something simple. Land teaches patience. Trees don't grow overnight, neither does justice. You have to fight, yes, but you also have to wait. The money from the damages judgment came through in the spring. $410,000, enough to cover every repair, every legal fee, and then some. I didn't waste it on toys or travel. I poured it back into the land. A perimeter fence went up deep in the tree line, invisible from the road but strong enough to mark the message. This place is watched, this place is kept. Near the fake road they'd tried to carve, I placed a monument, 4 feet of granite with 5 words chiseled clean. This land was not for sale. Below it, a brass plate, private property, keep out, surveillance active. It wasn't anger anymore, it was closure. Neighbors stopped by, cautiously at first. A man brought me pie. A woman offered to help mend erosion on the South Trail. A few apologized, awkwardly, admitting they hadn't known the extent of what Karen had been doing. I believed them. Not everyone is guilty just because they live under the same roof. And that's the thing I kept learning through all of it. Sometimes the loudest bullies make the quiet ones complicit without them even realizing it. Most of those homeowners weren't schemers. They were just people. People who wanted their lawns cut, their trash picked up, their neighborhood kept neat. They never imagined their dues were buying forgeries and failed land grabs. Forgiveness doesn't come easy when you've watched sparks fly off your gate and heard a stranger claim your driveway belongs to the community. But standing there, shaking the hands of neighbors who admitted their part in silence, I felt something soften. Not acceptance, not friendship, but maybe recognition that we'd all been caught in someone else's storm. Murphy got a new chew toy that spring, shaped like a little dump truck. I named it Karen. He tore the tires off first. And every morning I went back to my porch. Coffee steaming, pine-scented air brushing through the valley, the creak of the chair under me. My gate stood tall at the ridge, locked, gleaming, unbroken. Peace doesn't always come easy. Sometimes it comes after you've been dragged through mud and lawsuits and lies. But when it finally returns, it feels like breathing again after holding your lungs empty for too long. People say you can't fight the HOA, that they always win, that the paperwork, the lawyers, the endless committees will grind you down until you give in. I used to believe that, until I didn't. Now when I sit on my porch at dawn, mug of coffee warming my hands, Murphy curled at my boots, I look out at a line of steel and concrete and know the truth. You can fight. You just have to be willing to endure. The county sent me a formal apology, and with it came new surveys, iron posts set deep into the soil, permanent in the books. No easement, no access, no loopholes, not now, not ever. The land is mine, fully, finally, without question. Sometimes I walk the boundary line, boots sinking into pine needles, granite boulders cold under my hand. The forest is quiet again, except for birdsong and the rustle of deer through the underbrush. Where they once tried to carve a fake road, there now stands a monument of stone. This land was not for sale. People stop to read it sometimes. A hiker once took a photo and nodded toward me in the distance as if he understood. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but I didn't build it for them. I built it for me. A reminder that there are lines in life that you do not cross, not for money, not for convenience, not for community benefit. Karen is gone now. Prison, 12 years, no parole for 5. The board that once nodded along with her dissolved under its own rot. In its place, a voluntary council with no teeth, no power, no bite. Just neighbors planning barbecues and bake sales, which is all an HOA should ever have been in the first place. Some of those neighbors came by afterward. A pie, a handshake, an apology whispered awkwardly on my driveway. I accepted them, because the truth is most people aren't villains. They're just quiet, and their quiet lets bullies grow loud. Murphy's getting older. His new doghouse sits facing the gate, though half the time he snores through the mornings. I don't mind. He's earned it. The chew toy shaped like a dump truck still sits by his bed, missing 2 wheels and a chunk of the cab. I still call it Karen. He still growls at it before chewing. And me, I still wake before sunrise, still walk my land with my head high, gravel crunching under my boots, the forest air cool in my lungs. Every morning I punch in the code at my gate, hear the solid click of steel unlocking, and remember how close I came to losing this. Not the land, not really, but the peace of it, the dignity of it. Here's the truth I've come to carry. Dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. Sometimes it looks like patience. And sometimes it looks like a man sitting in court for hours, letting the liars talk themselves into a noose while the evidence piles higher than their excuses. The fight didn't make me stronger, it made me certain. Certain that what we build with our own hands, whether it's a gate, a home, or a life, is worth defending. Certain that no paper stamped in red and gray has more weight than sweat poured into the soil. And certain that when you stand your ground, even against the loudest bullies, sometimes the world finally stops and listens. I don't tell this story to boast. I tell it because I know there's someone out there, right now, staring at a letter that looks official, feeling their stomach drop as words like compliance and easement threaten to unravel everything they worked for. And to that person I say, don't fold, don't panic, document, stand tall, hold your line. Because sometimes, the strongest sound in the world isn't a gavel or a grinder. It's the silence of a locked gate, standing firm at the top of a ridge. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.